In today's video, we are making block number 10 in our series, which is the woven block. Hi everybody, I'm Tom and I am the Colourblind Quilter, and you are watching season 1 of Behind the Blocks, and we are on video 10 today, which is the woven quilt block. During this series we have been building on our skills by learning to make blocks using squares and rectangles, and now we have a clever little block that looks a lot more complicated than it actually is. With every video there is a free worksheet that you can download in the description below, and it will have step-by-step instructions on how to make this block, as well as all the fabric requirements and cutting instructions, and you'll find at the end of it a colouring page and information on how to make this block in 3 other sizes. And there's also a second free worksheet that has all the fabric requirements and cutting instructions so that you can make the entire sampler quilt. And also I have a pre-quilt colouring page so that you can go ahead and colour this quilt and make it your own. Now the woven block, when I first saw this, I thought it reminded me of Celtic knot patterns, and I thought it must be really complicated to make, but actually once I broke it down I realised that it was fairly simple and you could come up with some very clever looking quilts with some minimal piecing. It's fun and quick to make, and it's also chain piecing friendly. And make sure to stick around to the end of the video because I have 3 example quilts that are made using this block to show you what's possible with this. And if you've missed any of the videos in this series of Behind the Blocks so far, I will put a link in the corner so that you can catch up and sew along with us. So let's get started then. To make this block you are going to need, in fabric A you will need one 3.5 inch square and one 3.5 by 6.5 inch strip. In fabric B, you'll need one 3.5 inch square and one 3.5 inch by 6.5 inch strip. In fabric C, you'll need one 3.5 inch square and one 3.5 inch by 6.5 inch strip. In fabric D, you'll need one 3.5 inch square and one 3.5 inch by 6.5 inch strip. And in the background, you'll need 4 3.5 inch squares. So we should begin by taking each of the background squares and placing them right sides together with one of the fabric A, B, C and D 3.5 inch squares, and we're going to join those all together with a careful 1/4 inch seam. And chain piece these through, just butt them right up against the one before that. Feel free to pin if you need to. Once we're done sewing, we're just going to clip these apart with the scissors and then head to the ironing board. So place the colour on top that you want the seam to go in the direction of, and then set it with the iron, roll it back and then press gently, making sure not to stretch or distort them. So next, with the fabric A segment orientated to the left, we attach a fabric C strip. With the fabric B segment orientated to the left, we add a fabric A strip. With the fabric C segment, we attach a fabric D strip. And with the fabric D segment, we attach a fabric B strip to it. Again, we're chain piecing these, and as you can see, I'm just aligning these as I go at the sewing machine, but you can feel free to pin these. Be careful that the seam underneath is going in the right direction and that your seam plate doesn't push it in the wrong direction. And you can see I'm just adjusting there to make sure that that doesn't happen. You will see me using a leader throughout the sewing process. I like to use that to catch any thread tension issues. Next, we're going to take each of these segments and we're going to press them all towards the newly attached strip. So just set the seam first, roll it back and then gently press with the iron, being careful not to stretch. And there you have all the segments with the correct pieces attached. Now we're going to place these in the right order, make sure that you get everything orientated in the right direction. And then place these right sides together and we're going to join them with a careful 1/4 inch seam. Feel free to pin as required, just picking off some loose threads, and then I'm lining the sides up. There are no seams to match, so it's dead easy. Join with your careful 1/4 inch seam, adjusting as you go or pinning as required. And then once you've done that one, just butt the next one right up against it and chain piece it through your sewing machine. And this one, my seam is going towards the foot, so I'm just holding it down with my finger just to make sure that it doesn't get pushed in the wrong way. And then clip these apart, and at the ironing board we are pressing the top row towards the right of the block. And then on the bottom row we are pressing the seam towards the left of the block, and this will ensure that that center seam nests nice and snug. Then take the top and bottom rows, place them right sides together, and just take a minute here to make sure that that seam is nice and snugly nested. It's the only seam you need to nest, so here you can just see me popping a pin in to make sure that that doesn't move. And then at the sewing machine, I'm just making sure the edges are lined up, making sure the seams underneath don't get caught, and then sewing through. I remove the pin once I get to it before I sew over it, and then just finish sewing that seam, and you can see me holding down that seam so that it doesn't get pushed in the wrong direction. And then in the ironing board, we are going to press the seam towards the bottom of the block. Roll it back, use your fingers to gently press, being careful not to stretch. I'm not placing any tension when I tug on that top, but I'm just gently pulling it to make sure the seam is fully open, and then I'm giving the block a really good press to get it nice and flat. And you can do this from the back as well. Just flip it over, make sure all the seams are flat, going in the direction that they're supposed to. And that is the woven block. So there you have it. That was how to make the woven block. And I bet it was probably a lot simpler than you expected it was going to be. The block is so simple to make when it comes to chain piecing. In this, you saw me step by step going through how to make each of the 4 parts of the block one at a time. If I was going to chain piece this, instead of cutting the squares and sewing them together at the start, what I would do is I would cut strips. And then I would join the strips together and then cut them into segments. And then I would take another strip of the corresponding colour and I would attach those square segments to the side of that strip, sewing them all in one hour, then cutting the strip up and pressing. And that would give me all of these in a very short, fast amount of time. And all you would have to do is just cut lots of width of fabric strips to make this happen. So now I want to show you a couple of example quilts made using this block. And what you'll see is it's quite easy to get some interesting effects just by the way that you rotate these blocks in your placement. But it's also interesting what happens when you add sashing to this. So let's have a look. Now in this first example, this is just the same block laid out, but it is rotated so that you get continuous lines. So what you can see is that the green line runs horizontally across the quilt, the red line and the grey lines run vertically across the quilt. And so I've just rotated these all so that they're in their same direction, and it gives this effect almost like a gate on a castle. And it's pretty cool. And actually, if you were to work with your colours here and find shades and tones, you could actually make this look like shadows of the colours, and that would create a really interesting effect. I've just added a thin white border around the outside of this, and that just helps this portcullis, I think it's called, effect to just float in the middle of the quilt. Very cool and very interesting. Now in the second example, again, it's the same layout as before, but in Prequilt I have used the magic quad and the randomized rotate feature to create this very random looking collection of blocks. Still has a thin white border to help this float, but you can see that there's much more chaos in this. And whilst it looks like there are places where the lines continue, it is fairly randomized. This may or may not be somebody with OCD's worst nightmare. They may love it or they may hate this. I'm not sure how I feel about it, but it just shows you that if you just were to randomly place these, you can actually find some symmetry in the design. So something a little different, just to show you what's possible. And now finally the third example, and I actually think that this example is my favorite one. So what you can see here is, again, it's the same woven block, but this time I have introduced sashing in between each block and in between the rows of blocks. And as you can see, there's a secondary pattern starting to form. The white background is creating squares that join together. And when you look at it, on one hand you can see crosses, but then when you look at it again, all you can see is this kind of network of the white squares. So it creates a very cool visual effect that I really like. The blocks are placed semi-randomly. Some of them you can see are going in the same direction and other ones are rotated. And you could play with that, how it works, and have, the blue lines all running down one way, the red lines all running down another way, and you could create some kind of movement across the quilt. The first row could be all the red lines lined up, the second one could be all the blue, etc. And it would create some kind of movement in the quilt. But I really like this, and I think this is actually my favourite. Even though I quite like the portcullis in the first example, I think just the way that this plays with your eyes, almost like a magic eye picture, is really interesting, and I would be quite happy to make this quilt. So that was block number 10 in our series, the woven block, and that was a few of the example quilts that you can make using this block. I do hope that you're sewing along at home with all these lovely blocks. Don't forget there are 2 free worksheets in the description below, one about how to make this block with fabric cutting instructions and how to make it in other sizes, as well as step-by-step instructions. And then also there is all the fabric requirements and cutting instructions to make the entire sampler quilt. I hope you're sewing along, and I hope you'll share your progress on Instagram with me using the hashtag BTBSeason1. And don't forget to tag me, the Colourblind Quilter, so that I can follow along and see all your lovely blocks. In the next video, video number 11 in this series, we are going to be making the city streets block. And when I sat down to make the example quilts for that, I was pretty surprised at what I came up with. So I hope you'll join me next time to see that. If you find this video helpful, please do consider giving it a thumbs up. And if you want to get notified when more videos from this series come out, or indeed any of the other great videos that I'm working on, then please do subscribe and click the bell so you get notified. So take care, and I'll see you next time.